Okay, we were doing Tafnan based, halacha based, and our halacha alpha based were about Aino ben Yomo. So we're going to just do two things that have to do with Aino ben Yomo, but not really directly related to Din, but close enough. Okay, the first is when we want to make a kli Aino ben Yomo, how does a kli become Aino ben Yomo? So the simple way you become Aino ben Yomo is you don't use the kli for 24 hours. Okay, after 24 hours, now the kli is Aino ben Yomo. So listen to a question that came up. A company had a line that they used for milchigs and another one that they used for parv. The milchig line also ran plenty of parv products on it, which were just labeled milchigs because they didn't want to have the kashrus. Right? All of a sudden, they got a huge order to make milchig product. Okay, they had this huge order to make milchig product, and they wanted to run the milchig product on the parv line. So then they were going to have to kashrus it, and it needed to be Aino ben Yomo, and they could not let the kli be Aino ben Yomo. Okay, they could not. It was like a huge expense for them to be down for 24 hours. They were working the way it was at that time was they were working. They told us even on Thanksgiving. Okay, that's how they were trying to show us how serious they're taking this order. What? No, there would be inflation. So the shayla was like this. During the 24 hours after the milchigs, when they're getting ready to kashrus to parv, could they run something parv during that time and label it as dairy? So could they use the machinery for parv, for kosher parv during the 24 hours and consider that to be downtime also? Okay? Or does downtime mean take 24 hours and 24 hours that there's nothing in it? Okay? Does 24 hours mean 24 hours of nothing in the kli? Take the pot, don't use it for 24 hours at all. Or could you do stuff that's kosher and parv, like in this case, where they don't care that it's going to be called?
It was a retail product, right?
What did you say?
It wasn't a retail product. Normally parv labels dairy, but you can't just do that.
No, again, they had stuff in the plant that they made with parv ingredients.
No, it's customer. You can't just take something that's always parv and just label dairy.
No. They had items that they always made out of parv ingredients that they labeled dairy.
Oh, okay.
That they had because they had their other line that they ran this stuff on. They had stuff that for convenience they labeled dairy just so they could run on the milk equipment. So they had the stuff that they could run here. They could run stuff that was really parv but was called dairy. That was they didn't have the problem with that. But they couldn't run nothing. They needed to run something on this equipment. So Shabbos could Aino ben Yomo, they run nothing on it. Okay. So they asked this question to Rabbi Shechter, and Rabbi Shechter had to do a bunch of parts of the question. Okay, before we get to Rabbi Shechter said, there's a din about this. Okay.
Did we have this all the time? We asked this before. It's not the first time we came up.
And what do you think the answer is?
I forgot what let's say you traced up something.
No, traced is different.
Okay, it's very different. Let's say you traced up something and then you boil water in it.
Okay.
During that 24 hours.
Right.
So that's the same question.
Yes. So there's a din about this. Okay, there's a din about this, and the din says if it went from milchigs to make it, if you had something that was used for milchigs, we use milchigs. They were used for milchigs, and you wanted to make it parv, then it has to be Aino ben Yomo. And the Mechaber says, and you can't even cook water during those 24 hours. Okay, you can't cook water during those 24 hours. So the shayla is, why can't you cook water during the 24 hours? So in your case, where it was treif, then we have an easy explanation. Well, in either case, the reason why you should not be allowed to cook something parv in it is because if 5 hours and you cook water, the blia goes into the water. Now the water is treif. So now the kli has a fresh blia of treif. It doesn't have a 5-hour-old blia. It has a fresh blia of treif, right? So now the blia we have to start the clock again. Okay. So what happens is that really what's going on is, in order to say, if cooking something parv in the middle, something kosher, like water in the middle, the reason why it should make the kli treif is because of chanan. It has to do with the dinim of chanan. It's because the blia that comes out is going to go into the water, okay, and then it's going to turn around, make the water treif, and go back into the kli. So the question is that the Mechaber doesn't hold of chanan. Okay, that's a question, but the Mechaber doesn't hold of chanan. And in Yonenu, what happens if we're doing something milchigs? Milchigs, there's no chanan in milchigs. Okay, there's no chanan for something that's just pure milchigs. Okay, that's a question that really the shayla there is whether the Mechaber holds. That's what the shayla is, because this is a chanan shayla. I don't want to talk about this. The chanan, the real chaticha nafkas available is if you cook milk with meat together, the combination is 100% treif. Okay, it's not. Let's say there's a pound of meat and a pound of milk. It's not 1 pound of treif. It's not a treif piece of meat with a little milk mixed into it. It's 2 pounds of pure treif. Right, the whole thing becomes treif. So there, everyone holds of chanan. There, the whole chaticha becomes an available. Everyone holds of that. The shaila is by other isurim. Okay, so now there's a machlokes, the machaber and the shach. What happens if you have basar b'cholov? Okay, you have basar b'cholov. You make these 1 pound of milk and 1 pound of meat. You cook them together. Now, if you cook that basar b'cholov in water, would there be chanan on that water? So that's the machlokes. What the machaber would hold. Is that chanan? Is that chanan of basar b'cholov or it's not chanan of basar b'cholov? That's the machlokes, the machaber and the shach. When we say chanan by basar b'cholov, the simple case is where the basar and cholov will cook together. It's a shaila whether it's also considered chanan of basar b'cholov when the basar b'cholov is not cooked in water. Okay, that has to do with what the machaber means. But the shaila is if the whole din depends on chanan, then if we have something that's milchigs, okay, there's no chanan in milchigs. Okay, it's is available. Or even in other cases where it would be treif, if we be in the right situations where we would be meko, that's chanan. It could be meko maybe also. Okay, but in the milchigs is the easiest case because there's no chanan by milchigs. So if this whole thing depends on chanan, maybe we could be meko. That was a proposal to be meko because of that. Because the machaber has, I'm going to put that on the side. It has to do with the basar b'cholov of it. Okay, the machaber has to do with whether he holds that it's basar b'cholov or chanan. So what I'm going to say in a minute, maybe answer has to do with that also. So the B'Shachta said no. He said when you count 24 hours, you cannot count the time that the kli was hot. It has to be 24 hours of the kli being cold. The hours when the kli is hot don't count towards the 24 hours. They don't restart the clock either. To restart the clock, you need chanan. But the hours when it's hot don't count towards the 24 hours. So if you have 30 hours that the kli hasn't been used for treif, and of that 30 hours, 2 hours were used for water, so you still have 28 hours to make it Aino ben Yomo. 28 hours is fine. You're Aino ben Yomo, unless you have chanan. But if you use it for 10 hours, then you only have 20 hours, and therefore then you don't have any 24 hours. You can have 24 hours 10. So the time that you use it for that it's hot is like a pause. Like you put the Aino ben Yomo on pause, but you don't have to restart the clock. To restart the clock needs chanan, but to pause the clock is just a din of that's automatic. So Rebelsky had rayas that it's not true, but forget about the rayas, and it's very much not accepted his din. But the question is, what is he talking about? What does that mean? Why should you say that you should pause the clock? The way should come from that you should pause the clock and say is if 30 hours you haven't used it for treif, but for 10 hours of those you use it for water, those 10 hours don't count towards the cheshbon. Like, where did that come from? Okay, now, he didn't say this far. He just thought that was obvious to him. But in fact, there's the Yad Yehuda who says this to him. Yad Yehuda says the same thing as him. But just to put it into perspective, to say how not accepted this din is that the Yad Yehuda says, Makam hinichuli, that I should be mechadish this din. Okay, so that's, the Yad Yehuda didn't live that long ago, and everybody until him never thought of it. So it's just to talk about the time of the chiddush. I'm telling you, Rebelsky had rights, and it's not accepted what he says. But the Yad Yehuda says like this. He says the Gemara says that a belia becomes, after 24 hours, becomes nes tam lefkam. But the Gemara says also that even a minute of being belua is it has a little bit of pegimah right away from the beginning. So the Yehuda says that the 24 hours that it takes to become nes tam lefkam, it's not an on-off switch. It's not that at 23 hours it's perfectly great tam, and at 24 hours, all of a sudden when it crosses the line, all of a sudden it becomes bad tasting. It's not a dramatic change. That at 24 hours, all of a sudden it goes from being tasting good to tasting bad. It's a gradual process that takes 24 hours. So after an hour, it's 1/24 of the way being pogum. And then, it keeps on going worse and worse until at the end of 24 hours, it's so bad that it's crossed the line to being completely nes and tam lifta. And until then, it's getting to the point where it's nes tam lifta, and after 24 hours, it's crossed over to the point that it's completely nes and tam lifta. So that's what he says. And based on this Gemara, he says it's a gradual process. But then he says another thing. He says it's obvious to him that Pegimah, things only become lefkam when they're sitting stale in a kli. If the kli is hot, and especially if the blia is connected to hot liquids being cooked up in the pot, then they're not getting ruined. They're only getting ruined by just sitting there and like spoiling, like getting degrading while they're sitting in an empty pot. But if they're sitting in a pot and the pot's in the middle of cooking, then nothing's going to happen to them. So he says, if I have a pot and I haven't used it for 5 hours, so it's 5/24 of the way towards become it's partially pogum. It's partially less than pound of kam. Now I cook it in water. It doesn't become at that point. It stops. Doesn't get any worse. Like if you take I'll give you an example. If you take a fruit and you leave it on the counter, okay. So let's make up a number. In 24 hours, that fruit will rot just from sitting out in the room temperature. Okay. If you leave it in the fridge, it won't rot. It'll be perfect after 24 hours. So if you leave it out on the counter for 3 hours, okay, and so now it's begun to whatever happens that makes fruit rot, whatever it is, has started to happen. Now, if you put it back into the fridge for 10 more hours, you put the process on pause. If you stick it back on the counter, it can continue from where it was because it's picked up. Let's say we'll say it's microbes that make it small. They picked up a certain amount, put it into the fridge, it stops the process, put it back on the counter, it continues again. So here also, when it's cold and stale and just like sitting there, it will slowly degrade, and the time becomes lafkam. But if you put it into hot for a while, then it stops. That process stops where it is. It stops where it is, and then it continues after when you stop it. So the idea says, so therefore, the 24 hours has to be 24 hours of not being used for anything hot. Okay? Now he tells you the base doesn't hold like that, and many people don't hold like that, and I don't think it's a din. It's an unusual.
It's about a Shulchan possibly.
Yes, he does. He brings the idea. That's correct. But it's not. I can't tell you that even so that it's an accepted thing. It's a chumrah. It's really a chumrah because without the idea is not saying that there shouldn't be chanan also. No, there could be chanan. No, if let's say it was treif and then you cook the water in the middle, it'll be chanan and the clock starts again. Right. But the question here is, if you have a case where you don't have chanan, right. Let's say it's milchus, so then you would say what you would say is that the clock should keep on going. You just need 24 hours. Who cares if for an hour there was cooking in the middle of it? You shouldn't care. If it had 24 hours, the fact you
include the cooking time.
The cooking time should include, right? He's saying no, that cooking time doesn't count.
Why should everybody say that? Why should that be the case? That's because the bleas go out and it's not going to be nifkam during that time.
Why not? Bleas that
during that time.
So you think it has to be that the bleas? No, he doesn't say that. You're saying the bleas are going to come out. He says no. Even if it stays in, just being connected to the hot. How do you know it came out? Just being connected to the hot stuff is a.
Well, we always have to be choishes with coming out.
No, because what's going to happen is if the bleas come out, then there's going to be they get diluted. Then there's less bleas back in the kli. Okay, so maybe I'm not sure. We'll talk about that. I'm not sure, but. It's a chumrah, okay? Because most people assume that 24 hours is 24 hours. Who cares if there's hot water in the middle? Except for Hanan. The Machabers understood to me because of Hanan. That only because of Hanan that says the bleed goes out and restarts again.
There's really two reasons.
Okay.
One is Hanan, the other reason is because it goes out and gets refreshed.
What does that mean, gets refreshed? What does that mean? Okay, I guess that's part of Hanan. That goes out and now it's a...
Well, that's Hanan. It goes out and now it's not in the keli anymore. So you got to start the clock again.
So you're saying is that in order to become Aino ben Yomer, it has to have 24 hours straight of being cold. 24 hours straight of being cold, and if it goes out, then it lost its chance to become cold. It's like sitting there. Every time you pull it out, it starts again. To that, the Yehuda himself says that Yehuda says.
The first one said it. The second, the shaka. That's the other reason over there.
That what?
This halacha that you can't cook in the middle. If you cook water in the middle, it starts again because one is chanan, the other is because it went out and now
you're looking at it like where we say by kavush. That kavush has to be for 24 hours straight, and if you take it out in the middle for an hour, then you start the clock again. Okay.
It's not by now. Once it came out,
right. So he talks about that also. If you want, he talks about that also. But the Yehuda himself says he assumes that it's not a on-off switch. It's not like we look at kavush that after 24 hours is a kvisha and before that there's nothing. It's a gradual process. So you're saying that even though it became a quarter of the way pogum, if I take it out, it starts again. It's a refresh the whole thing and starts again. Okay. Okay. Now there is a related.
I understand this whole shayla. Why did 24 hours? Once you kasher the milk and thing becomes not by nuts. And then the water, and then you're allowed to use it for fire. I mean, that's his whole shayla. That's what I'm asking. I don't understand this whole thing. Kasher the milk and keli. If you take a milk and keli.
That's ben yamin.
It's ben yamin, and you kasher it.
Yes.
So in the water already, the water is already b'di'evet part because it's not for not in the water.
Yes.
The thing is, not for not water, you allow a chachila take and put it into a flesh keli.
Okay.
So what's the problem? The kasher is within 24 hours. The water becomes not for not. And you're kashering as opposed to cooking it.
So you're going to kasher it as a ben yamin. Say since it's not barnat, I can kasher it as ben yamin, and therefore, I'm allowed to kasher a milk kli ben yamin. You're just saying, forget about it doesn't need to be any of your milk together.
That's it. Yeah, it's clear. Unless the chachila might do something wrong.
I don't remember. I don't remember. Mom, it's right on the din we're talking about. I don't remember what it was. That's what the din we're talking about is that. I don't remember. Okay. Now there's another shita, an even more unusual shita that I'm going to mention. It's not from here. It's in Tafnan Zayin, where the Bir Halacha says that if a kli, a similar thing to Rav Shachtain, but a different case, which is what happens if you have a kli that held cold liquids in it. Okay, it was a treif kli, and you put cold liquid into it.
Oh, Mom has a shower by Griffith.
Okay.
Yeah, it was totally needs to be the walk 24 hours. Down 24 hours. He said, "Can we have liquid in there cold? There's water sitting in there."
What do you do that for?
I guess you want to fill it before. They would leave it hot for straight since the end of cleaning out the last production in preparation for Monday morning. They would put in the liquid and keep it hot the whole time. And we come in to reduce the recorder and measure, there's a straight line of 100 and whatever degrees.
Right.
You can't do it, buddy.
Okay.
Like, would you leave cold liquid in there?
Okay.
So, I said, no problem.
So you said no problem, which is the thing. That's correct. But the Bir Halacha thinks that you should be machmir. And he says that you can only become Aino ben Yomer. He says he goes.
The Halacha comes to find for the kasha.
Yes, correct. So the Bir Halacha says, I'll tell you the kasha. Wait just 1 second. I'm going to mention that kasha. The Bir Halacha says that when it has to be Aino ben Yomer, it has to be empty for those 24 hours. If during the 24 hours there's something in there, a liquid that's in there for those 24 hours, it does not become Aino ben Yomer. It's a Beis Hillel Hebrew stone. Okay. Beis Hillel. It's a pure son of Shulchan. The Rabbi Shechta thing is you use something hot in the middle. Even if you put something cold in it, like his case, he has a tank. They only need to kasher on Monday morning, so on Friday they want to fill it up with water. Just leave water in there during the time that it's going to be Aino ben Yomer. So to that he says if it has anything in it, it doesn't become Aino ben Yomer. Anything liquid, and he's saying it to answer the kasha. That's what he said, which is a kasha, which is what's the reason kavush? You're not allowed to put liquids into a treif kli because it's kavush. So the kasha is, what's kavush? It takes 24 hours for kavush to happen. By the time it happens, it'll be Aino ben Yomer. So what could be the problem? It'll be mutter. Okay? And so all the Achronim answer, they say, you're right that it'll be mutter b'di'evet, but it won't be mutter l'chatchila. Okay? So this answer is to answer that question and say, no, since the liquid is in there for the 24 hours, it doesn't become Aino ben Yomer. Okay? But hagufa, what's the din if something liquid gets left in the kli? We say by the time the bleed, we say like the Taz and the Shach say, by the time the bleed comes out, it's Aino ben Yomer. We really do say like that. We don't say this Beis Hillel. So the Bir Halacha is saying to be masking like that shita, but that's not at all accepted. That's what would you say if someone left liquid in the kli? You'd say, but the evidence mutter. That's what the Taz says. But the evidence mutter because by the time the bleed comes out, it's Aino ben Yomer. Not like this shita that's saying that if liquid stays in there, it stops the Pegimah process. No Pegimah happens on something. Okay. Okay, now I really want to do something else. I didn't know.
Am I confused? Is there also Lina Slima by?
Yeah, so that din, yes, you're right. That's in the Mechaber says you can't have water cooking in it. The Mechaber says if you had water cooking in it, but you also had Lina Slima, so it wasn't Aino ben Yomer. It was 24 hours since you made the treif, and of those 24 hours, the entire night hours, there was nothing happening, and there was water cooked either before the night or after the night. Then he says you could be mitzaref and be mekel, because on the one, some hold that Lina Slima was enough to be considered Aino ben Yomer. No time of kam makes it no time of kam, and some say that it's that there's no chanan, so it's a tziruf and you could be mekel. That's good. There's a possibility of being mitzaref. That is a fair shadin that you could be mitzaref. Okay. Now the other thing I wanted to talk about, I didn't think this was going to be as long, but the other thing I want to talk about, which is there's a substitute to making things Aino ben Yomer. Okay, a modern day substitute. Instead of waiting for things to be Aino ben Yomer, we artificially speed up the process by what we call being pug in the kli. Okay, where does that din come from that you could eat Pegimah kli? So the closest we have to makar to that is the Mechaber says that if you wash milchig and fleishig dishes together in the same pot of water, so you don't have to be worried about blias going from the milchig dishes to the fleishigs because the soap in the water. So the blias that go from the milchig dish to the fleishig dish have to pass through the soapy water. So in order to get from here to there, they have to pass through something that if any time it's transferring, it's getting ruined as it transfers. Okay, so you're artificially ruining the tam as it passes from the milchig kli to the fleishig kli. Okay, so until I don't know, this is what they tell me, that until 50 years ago, 75 years ago, everyone took the following thing out of what the Mechaber says. If I have a kli that's treif, and I put into it something that's pogum at a temperature that's yatzilad, the temperature that blias happen, so we'll use the number 170 for that. So let's just imagine the numbers that for sure is yatzilad, but let's just make up that number. I put in a something that's pogum at 170 degrees. It'll make the blias inside my kli pogum, and now if I want to kasher, I can kasher even though it's ben yomer, because when the blias come out into the hagolah water, you always have to be in ben yomer because the blias come out, trafe up the kashering, the hagolah water. But now those blias won't trafe up the water because the blias that come out will ruin the taste of the water. They won't trafe up the kli. Okay. Alone came the Chazon Ish. This part is printed. Okay. The other part is just that's what people say. The Chazon Ish says I don't understand. He says blias going into a kli is a chumrah. We say if you cook treif in your pot, you have to be choishish that blia went in from the food into the pot. He said you can't be makel and say that a blia went in.
It goes out.
No, blia goes in. You put treif in. If you put treif into your pot, why do you say your pot is treif? You said maybe the blia from the chazer went into the doifnei hakli. That's a chumrah. So maybe the blia went in, and then if I cook kosher afterwards, I choishish maybe the blia came out. But here you're saying the blia goes in lakula. You're saying I have soap. I'm cooking up soapy water in my pot, and now I'm saying I'm going to be making. Say I know that the davar hapogum went into the walls of the kli. He says you have no right to say that. Maybe it did, and maybe it didn't. So you want to say I could kasher because the blia that's in there is already pogum. Who says? Maybe the blia is not pogum. Maybe no blia went in at all. It doesn't happen every time. Who says? How do you have a right to say that? So the Chazon Ish says the only way you could use this speeded up process to make something to kasher something that's ben yomer is if the liquid that's pogum is at a temperature, a hagolah temperature. Because when a kli is at roischin, when it's boiling, then we know that any blias that are in there come out. So any blias that are in the walls of the kli, when the water is at roischin, comes out. Now, when it comes out, it gets mixed in with the soapy water. If it stays out, it doesn't go back in, wonderful. If it goes back in, it goes back in with the soap also. I mean, at this point, it's already been mixed with the soap. So if it goes back in, it'll go back in with the davar hapogum, and it'll be lefkam. He says, but if you put it in 170, he says, who said it went in? Who said?
How much when it's a falter? Let's say it's always close to 100.
Okay, very good question. But okay, your mom you hadn't before. So very good question. The question, so he's saying is that so let's say I only use this pot at 180 degrees. So let me do that at 180 degrees. In fact, according to Chazon Ish, that should be fine because from the Hilchos Hagol's Kalim, I'm kashering the Kabbalah Kapolta gets the blia out. I got the blia out. Now if it goes back in, it goes back in. Okay, and in fact, it doesn't have so much application, that idea, but it had a very specific application. It was such a good idea, but they didn't buy it, which was for trucks. Okay, it was very negated to trucks because in trucks they have huge problems making sure the trucks get dedicated for kosher and they don't get traced up, all kinds of issues. And one of the solutions to the problem is that they figured out, or they thought they figured out, that everything that's traced that's in a truck is under 160 degrees. Because that's what they came up with such a, I think it was a mistake, but that's what they believed, that it was always under 160 degrees. And the caustic that's used to wash the trucks in most of these places is over 160 degrees. So they said every truck that goes through a truck wash gets kasher at least Kabbalah Kafpote, the Pegimah is at least Kabbalah Kafpote for the blia that went in of the treif that was put in there beforehand. Okay, that was the chap. They wanted to say like that. Which two things went wrong with it. One is that Radovsky didn't accept it. I don't really remember why he didn't like it. But the other thing was that it wasn't true. That there are things that go like 180, 185 degrees. I was in a place myself a year ago where I saw I looked at the truck receipt and it said delivery like 185, 190.
A second. You mean that it went in at 185 degrees, or the truck maintained it at 185? The truck was heated.
Delivery temperature was 185.
I mean, the truck maintained it at that.
Yeah, trucks are usually filled. The trucks, what they do is they have this really brilliant system. What they do is like this: every car motor needs to be cooled off. It gets very hot, so they have liquid, coolant running through it to keep it cool. So in trucks, in tanker trucks, what they do is they connect that cooling line into the back of the truck, and underneath the liquid that's in there, the pipes run through. So what happens is the engine gets hot, makes this water hot, and that hot water or the hot coolant, instead of just going to the radiator to cool down, goes to the back of the truck, gives over its heat into the the oil that you're carrying in the back, and it comes back much cooler, goes back into the truck. So the vegetable oil in the back of your truck is serving to cool off the engine in the front of the truck. So the oil needs to be hot and the engine needs to be cold, and they exchange heat.
It should be puggled from the gasoline.
So, no, this is just cool. But the coolant is puggled. It is, because they put in, I forgot what it is. They put in stuff, there's stuff in there isn't fast puggled, but that's not what they're, that's not, but yes, it does keep it hot. It's basically like cleavation. It goes in hot, and then it has this thing to maintain the heat. This is heating channels, not coils. Okay. Okay, so if you did a Kabbalah Kafota, we could argue that it's okay, but you have to just remember here that there's something very dangerous. Okay, let me back up a second before I get to this. What happened is that the Hashkafas basically decided to be machmir for the Chazon Ish and say that you can't do Pegimah at just Yatzil at this point, 160, 170 degrees. You have to Pegimah at roiskon temperatures. Okay, but now the Chazon Ish has a, so to speak, cooler that the other people didn't hold of either, which was, the Chazon Ish says, if you cook up the soapy water at roiskon temperatures, then that's it. Any blia that came out, all the blia comes out. If it goes back in, it goes back in with the Pegimah, so you're safe. So the others argue and say, wait a second, we're going to have a halacha soon, which is you're not allowed to do hagala with sharmashkin. And one of the examples of sharmashkin is soapy water. You're not allowed to do hagala with sharmashkin. So, but the evidence works. But the evidence is a hagala. But you can't just kasher just with that. So you could do that as a way of being plugged in the blias. But you have to kasher with real water also.
What about pitrix?
So, can you hold 1 second? I'm going to answer that question 1 second. So you can't kasher with sharmashkin. So if you can't kasher with sharmashkin, so to be machmir for the Chazon Ish, people do the Pegimah at roiskon temperatures. Okay, that way they make sure they've for sure been plugged in. To be machmir for the other people,
this whole thing doesn't make sense.
Okay, could you wait one second? Let me just finish my sentence. Okay, for the other people, they say after you finish doing the Pegimah step, now do a Kashering with plain water to make sure that you did a real Kashering for the other people. Yeah, what doesn't make sense?
It's a theory.
Because
if you're saying King Kasher Sharmashkin, you're saying it didn't come out.
It didn't come out, right?
So they're back to square one.
Right. So the answer is you're right. If we take all the things together, we didn't do anything. But what it is it's like, according to the Chazon Ish, Lishitasa, it works. According to the other people, Lishitasa, it works.
It doesn't make sense.
Okay.
There's no point to be machmir. You're not gaining anything by doing it a second time.
Because?
Oh, you're saying according to if you don't hold like a Chazon Ish, you don't need Yatzil.
Correct. You don't
need a Kashering temperature.
Right. You just need to push the Pegimah in. You did that. You did push the Pegimah in. According to the others who hold that you could push Pegimah into the blia. So you did that. You can't draw blia out, but you pushed it in. Of course, then you pushed it in, so you gained something. Okay. Now, you're right anyhow that we're Kashering Shamashkin. You don't Kashering Shamashkin. But the answer is you really do. But the evidence Shamashkin does work. So it's like a okay. And the truth is,
what
did you say? Okay. And now,
I don't make companies do this. It happens. I don't. You don't
what? You don't what? I didn't hear what you said.
I do Kasher twice.
You do what? You just do with
whatever they did. I don't know, caustic, whatever it is. They probably some of them. I don't know. You also the main caustic is not shamash.
So okay.
But all these things that are more and
okay. So before we get, I'm getting to that in one. I am getting to that in 1 second. I'm going to hopefully answer your question, and maybe we'll explain the Chazon Ish also. But first, let me do Moshe. Moshe, what about if I put in Pitrix? Okay, and that is a key to what's going on here, which is that what does it mean when it says that certain things are shamash? This has really been for later. We're just mentioning that.
We want to put in the Kashering water?
Into the Kashering water.
They're not going to let you do it. Maybe they will.
Okay. The things like it says this is really for later. We'll say it now, which is when we say things count as shar mashkin. It's a Ramban who says that, and he talks about it that these thick liquids that they have more to them don't penetrate kalim the way plain liquid waters do, and they don't get all the way in like they're supposed to. Okay, and it gives the impression that the shar mashkin have a different consistency than plain water does. And let's say oil. That's one of the examples. Is oil. Oil has a different consistency than water, or juice, fruit juice has a different consistency. It doesn't have the same like not as fluid. It doesn't seem as fluid as water does. So the shadow is like this. What happens if you take something that doesn't do anything to the water? Okay, and bitters is a great example of it. You put in mamish 10 parts per million. Okay, the water doesn't look different. It's all the same. If you taste it, it tastes different. But the look of it, there's nothing wrong with it.
There's fluoride in our water also.
What's it?
Let's go over to my water. Shar mashkin. There's fluoride in it.
Okay. So the answer was, they asked this question to Rabbi Yashiv. Okay. The OU asked it at one point to them also. The OU's postman already said there was mutter, but they asked him and other people asked him, and they said if it doesn't color the water or cloud the water or do any other visible change to the water, that's not considered shar mashkin. If the water still looks like plain water, it seems to have the same consistency and look as regular water, that's not shar mashkin. So if you put in bitrix, it wouldn't be shar mashkin. Even if you put in caustic, not his way. If you put in caustic like normal people do at 0.5%, he has his own way. But more people put in caustic at 0.5%. Yes, you're 5%. But a tiny amount of caustic, it doesn't do anything to the water. If you look at the water looks like a plain glass of water afterwards also. So those kind of waters, it's very reasonable to say that's not considered shar mashkin at all. So that shar mashkin, that water has the advantage of being pogum, but it has also the advantage that you could hug over with it. You could do both at once. Okay, and in fact, that might be what the Chazon Ish meant. When the Chazon Ish said if you have water that has the soap mixed into it, and you could do draw it out and the whole thing, and he ignores the fact that it's shar mashkin because he might have been talking about something where it didn't turn into shar mashkin. It was poking the water without making it into shar mashkin. Okay, he may use words like soap, but he may not mean it's soap like it's going to talk about in the later halacha. He just means this: you put something that was poking. Let's say you put in pictures. You put a spoonful of it, and it'll be poking 1,000 gallons. I mean, it doesn't affect the water at all. So that's a compromise, and that'll be Malamad's chos on Yossi, who kashrus just with the shar mashkin, because it's not really shar mashkin. Okay, the stuff the caustic that they're using, the caustic, if you would take a cup of it doesn't look any different than regular water. Okay? In which case, it's not shar mashkin. Okay? I don't think that most people do. Most people treat it like shar mashkin, but that might be out of ignorance. I'm not saying that that's justified. It might just be out of a. Okay, I just have to end what I was trying to say before. I just got to end with that, which is, I should say some whatever. Okay. I'll end with this, which is that. You have to remember that there's a tremendous advantage to being really Aino ben Yarmai, which is if a kli is really Aino ben Yarmai, then even if you do a horrible job at your Kashering, okay, or you forgot about a pipe or something got wrong, something messed up, the food is kosher b'diavad. Okay, you're okay. You've covered yourself. If you're opposing something, you're doing something very dangerous. Because if you didn't do a perfect job in your Kashering, you didn't hit every spot, you missed the piece, so whatever it is, something wasn't perfect, your food's could be treif b'diavad. It could even be treif b'diavad. So the Pegimah has this advantage that I can kasher an hour later, I'll just be poking it. But you're taking a chance in that if you didn't get it perfect, then you blew it. If you didn't get it perfect, then your kli is really treif, and even b'diavad the food might be treif. So it has even with all these advantages, you're have to be more cautious at it, and it's a risk. And I don't know if that's the reason, but there are people who will say, or the times that people will say, to not rely on Pegimah l'chatchila, and only do it as a b'diavad. And you really have to be in the ben Yarmai, and if you're stuck, then you do Pegimah.
He wrote there, in very person wrote in the thing, from the that you can't do it's also b'diavad. The Ramah says you can only.
So I'm good.
You disagree with him, right?
I'm not disagreeing. I didn't disagree.
You can't. The Ramah says the Chachil is supposed to be Aino ben Yarmai, right? So included in that is you're not to do Pegimah.
Right.
The
The
whole.
last one, the last one.
No.
Before the last one.
So I will tell you that depending on, we'll talk about it afterwards. That's not a unanimous position. Okay, we'll talk about it afterwards exactly what that means. But there's those who argue that you shouldn't do it l'chatchila, and the reason for that may partly be not a halachic reason, but a practical reason, which is if you do it as a l'chatchila, you're taking a risk. Okay? If you're in ben yomei, your life is just simple. It's just you know that you're covered. You have a backup. You're covered if it's in ben yomei. There's certain sides. Okay, we'll stop it.